Nightside Talk the Vote 2016, broadcasting live from Endicott College in Beverly.
Good evening and welcome everyone to Endicott College here in Peabody. We have a great audience, a great studio audience of students and faculty and folks who listen to Nightside. Thank all of you for coming. We have a wonderful program for you tonight. For those of you who aren't familiar with Endicott College, I think it's the most beautiful college campus in America, right up here in the North Shore in Beverly, Massachusetts. Dick Wiley's done such a fabulous job. This school has 2,800 undergraduates, 2,500 graduates, many of them here in the audience at the Wax Auditorium tonight. And we are so pleased to be back here for our fourth Nightside Talk the Vote. We are honored tonight to have a great program put together. We're going to talk to some wonderful journalists in the second hour. First hour, we're going to talk to the former governor of New Hampshire, John Sununu. Let me just say one thing to our listeners out there. Hold off on phone calls. And Rob, back in the studio, I know that this audience is going to have a lot of questions. We will get to some phone calls later, but I don't want people necessarily having to hang on the phones for an hour or so. So, Rob, we won't take any phone calls until we decide that we'll give the numbers out. I know a lot of people know the numbers, but just forbear from dialing. Sit back and enjoy. We have with us to start the program tonight for the first hour, the former governor of New Hampshire. Let's have a nice Endicott welcome for Governor John H. Sununu. John Sununu is an historic American figure. He was actually born in Havana, Cuba. I just learned that, Governor. I did not realize that.
My mother was there.
His mom was present at the birth. Thank you, Governor. Right into that microphone because they're going to miss these jokes. Anyway, as we say, he's a very accomplished individual. He's a scientist. He graduated from MIT with degrees at both the bachelor, the master's, and the doctorate level. The 75th governor in the history of the great state of New Hampshire. He's married to his lovely wife who is here tonight, Nancy Sununu. Nancy, nice to see you. Welcome. Welcome to Endicott College. He served as governor from 1983 to 1989, and he also served as the chief of staff, the White House chief of staff of the 41st president of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush. And as I mentioned earlier, I do believe that it was Governor Bush's comeback in the New Hampshire primary in February of 1989 after having lost to then Senator Bob Dole of Kansas in the Iowa caucus that propelled George Bush to the White House. He also has a son running for governor in New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, and another son who served in the United States Congress. So we like to think about some political dynasties in various states around the country, and certainly in New Hampshire, it is the Sununu family. Governor Sununu, this has been a strange trip, as I think maybe the Grateful Dead might have said way back when you and I were a little younger. I'm told by President Dick Wiley of Endicott College that a lot of the young people in this audience tonight are a little disenfranchised from the election process because of the choices that we, the adults in the room, have set before them. I'd like to get just an overview. Have you ever seen a race like this in your political lifetime?
The answer, of course, is no. It is, but not only is the race unusual, but I think we have drifted over the last decade or so into a climate in the country that really scares me. And it's a climate that seems to have forgotten what this country's all about. And to some extent, we are in a state where we are criticizing things that really we should be applauding, and we are applauding things that we should be criticizing. Let me give you an example.
I was about to ask for a couple of those.
Look, all you have to do is pick up a paper or listen to the media, and they're going to tell you how horrible gridlock is. But the fact is, the system was designed to be gridlocked. Over 200 years ago, when they went down to Philadelphia to put the Constitution together, we were dealing with folks who understood the problems associated with concentration of power. And they were determined to set up a system in which power was not concentrated, neither in a single individual. They had a problem with the King of England. But they had also come out of states where they understood that legislative bodies can get too powerful and courts can intrude on rights. And so they worked awfully hard to build a system that balanced and shared and had in it checks and balances. And it is designed so that things don't get changed easily. Legislation doesn't get made easily. A president doesn't get full power, and the legislature can't twist the president's arm. So if there's only one thing I ask you to take out of this evening, is to understand when people go around bemoaning gridlock, they don't understand what the system is all about. Now, what can and can't happen in divided government? You can have an executive that knows how to lead. Dan, in his very complimentary introduction, pointed out that I worked for George Herbert Walker Bush, old President Bush. George Bush had one term, and he had a Congress that was 260 Democrats to 175 Republicans, 55 Democrats to 45 in the Senate. George Herbert Walker Bush passed more important domestic legislation in one term than any president in all their terms except Lyndon Johnson and Franklin Roosevelt, because he knew how to work with Congress. He knew how to sit down and negotiate differences. He had an idea of what was good for the country. He was willing to sacrifice his own political capital, and that's the way the system is designed. It is not designed for somebody to go in there and grouse about not being able to get legislation because it is not their folks in the House and Senate. Honest, if that's the only message you get out of what we do tonight, understand that the system was designed to work that way. There's a balance between the president and the legislature. The court is involved in that process. But beyond that, there's a balance between the federal government and the states and the power to the people. They are all delicately balanced, and their first 10 amendments are there to make sure that the people's rights to be a check on all this is retained. And so I really do think that over the last 10 years we have allowed ourselves to be gulled into thinking the bad things are good and the good things are bad.
By the way, when you use the verb gulled, I should mention that is the Endicott Gulls here. That is the team mascot, ladies and gentlemen, and I know they'll like that very much.
I apologize to the Gulls.
We're coming up on a break. I want to ask a question when we come back, and that is the question about executive power, which I think will dovetail nicely to what you just said. Our guest is former New Hampshire Governor John Sununu. We're broadcasting Nightside live from Endicott College. My name's Dan Ray. I'm the host of the aforementioned Nightside with Dan Ray. We have a great studio audience right here in the Wax Auditorium at Endicott College. We're going to get a lot of questions from the folks in the audience. We'll get some phone calls later on, I guarantee you that, but we're going to focus with the audience, the studio audience tonight. Many college students here who perhaps are hearing some things they've never heard before, Governor Sununu. Let's keep it rolling. Back here for a Nightside right after this. We are back live at Endicott College. Hey, we got a great studio audience. I love this school. I love this school. And we will get questions from our audience members, but I have a couple of more questions for former New Hampshire Governor John Sununu. Okay, Governor, you just spoke very eloquently about checks and balances. It was, in effect, the civics course in about 5 or 6 minutes, which I certainly agree with and understand. But other people say, well, when Congress won't act, I got a pen and I got a paper and I'm going to do what I have to do because I'm the President of the United States. I'm not going to mention anyone's name specifically. You can. But the concept of executive actions, doing what I, as President of the United States, feel is right. I think I know what you're going to say, but how, as someone who's a former presidential chief of staff, what was your reaction when you saw so many of the executive orders signed by this president?
Again, I refer you to the Constitution, and if you want to know the hard debates that went on behind that, go read the Federalist Papers, and they're brilliant. They understood how seemingly nice actions taken unconstitutionally can lead to disaster for a nation. You asked me about executive power. The president is the chief executive of the executive branch. All power in the executive branch flows from the president. He has it. He may delegate that power to others, but his role is to implement, not to make, but to implement the laws made by Congress that he and his predecessors have signed. In other words, the full procedure of legislation and presidential signature, or maybe an override of a veto, creates a law, and then the president has both the right and the responsibility to implement it. After a while, in the old days, even older than I am, when Congress wasn't there, it became appropriate for a president to act in the absence of Congress to execute an executive order to deal with a short-term issue. And Congress then would come and either affirm it with a law or reject it with a statement that it was inappropriate and a law. It is absolutely unconstitutional for someone to say, I have a pen and I'm going to do what Congress didn't. And in my opinion, just because some of the things he did that some of us may like, it is a slippery slope to chaos. Because whether you like it or not, someday someone who doesn't believe the way you do will be in office. And if we allow that mischief to take place, they will really do mischief against the kinds of things you care about.
Okay, talking about mischief, let me take you back to, I think it's 1990, and you talked about consensus, and you talked about bipartisanship. And your boss, the man you helped elect President of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush, spoke at the Republican convention in Houston. You and I were both there, and he said, read my lips, no new taxes. And in the minds of many in the Republican Party, he broke that and joined with Democrats, and some new taxes were passed. Give us a little bit of insight into how difficult a decision that was, and is that the sort of consensus or bipartisanship that you feel the country sometimes needs to go back to?
Yeah, I got a little nervous when I heard that line put in the speech, because I'd been a governor and I know that things come to your desk with some added fees and added taxes, adjusting for inflation or whatever it is, and you're going to get your nose rubbed in it if you make an absolute statement. But having said that, here's a perfect example of how a president deals with gridlock, with character and leadership. George Bush had said, read my lips, no new taxes. The House and Senate are controlled by Democrats. The leadership in the House and the Senate really resented that George Bush might have won by having made that promise. They were absolutely determined to make him eat those words. And for 2 years, we were negotiating a multi-year budget, a 5-year budget, and they would not accept anything that did not have an increase in taxes. That's okay. That's the balance. Checks and balance. May not have been for the best of reasons, but the country needed to cut spending and increase revenue for about $400 to $500 billion. We presented on 2 or 3 occasions packages that provided that kind of savings without taxes. It was rejected. George Bush knew the country needed the budget. People were talking about not having foreign countries buy our treasury bills anymore. We had a terrible economic slowdown. He understood that for the good of the country, he would have to take the political pain of yielding on that issue. And so he did. And we ended up with a budget that had a little bit of an increase in a gas tax that had not been adjusted for inflation for almost a decade. There was an increase in the beer tax. I could never understand why they insisted on that, but it was there. I think they figured he'd lose the blue-collar vote with that. And that budget was agreed to by the Republicans and the Democrats. Unfortunately, some of the purists on the Republican side were angry there was any taxes at all in there. They broke the agreement. The Democrats got a chance to rewrite the whole package. We ended up with not only a gas tax, but an increase in personal income tax. And the budget was passed, and the president signed it. The point is the following. Sometimes you have to spend personal political capital to break a gridlock and to make the system function. And sometimes you have to be involved as a personal leader in order to create a compromise. Dan Rostenkowski was the Democratic chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. That's the committee that was doing the budget. Dan Rostenkowski was a senior Democrat, been there for 25 years or whatever it was. George Bush had Rostenkowski to the White House over 24 times for personal conversations in which they negotiated the details of what they wanted to get into the budget. The president has to invest his time, he has to make a commitment, and he has to spend their political capital in order to make the system function. And if that happens, the specter of gridlock need not be real.
In your opinion, did that cost him potentially re-election?
I think it did. I think what really cost him the re-election was a nutcase by the name of Ross Perot. Think about it, a crazy millionaire who thought he ought to be billionaire who thought he ought to be president comes in and messes up the election process. But the fact is that Perot took 19% of the vote. George Bush lost, I think, by 5%. Perot took 19% of the vote, more than 2/3 of which were Bush votes. And so, yeah, it was a political problem. It probably catalyzed the opportunity for Perot, and then Perot came in and executed the coup d'etat.
Okay, we're going to get an audience question. David already has found a questioner. If you'd like to stand up, just give us a first name or whatever, and ask whatever you like of Governor Sununu. Go right ahead.
Hi, my name's Katie, and as we all know, both of the presidential candidates have been involved in publicized scandals. Do you think that any of the actions of either candidate should disqualify them from the race?
Should we get her to define the scandals in question?
No, that's a good question. We have two candidates running who are disliked by between 60 to 70% each of the voting population. Unfortunately, I am a believer in the Constitution, and the Constitution has a couple of things that disqualify you, like not being a citizen and so on. But being boorish or incompetent is unfortunately not listed in the Constitution. So I don't think, if your question is a strict question, should they be disqualified, I have to say no. Now, would I be happier with other candidates? Look, I made it clear over the past election cycle. I was strongly supportive of the concept of a governor coming in to fix the mess that I personally think has been created over the last decade. And I thought there were 2 or 3 Republican governors that could do it. And I'm not going to pretend I'm not partisan. I am partisan. I really do believe that the best presidents in this country have been former governors, whether it's Franklin Roosevelt or
Ronald Reagan,
or even in terms of getting, I think a major important piece of legislation was welfare reform, and I give Bill Clinton credit for having been able to do that with a Republican Congress. So I am a firm believer that the country is in a bad enough mess now that if I had been able to pick somebody, I would have picked one of the Republican governors.
Great question. Thank you very much. We're up on a break. We will be back with all of our friends here at Endicott College in Beverly, Massachusetts. As you can see, Governor Sununu will give you a very direct answer to any question you ask, direct or otherwise. This is Nightside. We're WBZ News Radio 1030, broadcasting live tonight on the road. Talk the Vote at Endicott College in Beverly, Massachusetts. Stay right there. We'll be right back, everybody. We are back live here at Endicott College in what's called the Wax Auditorium. And believe me, there were no wax figures in this auditorium tonight. We got a lot of students, a lot of faculty, a lot of friends and listeners of Nightside. And we have with us former New Hampshire Governor John Sununu, and we're going to get right to the questions over here. Beth has a question. Go ahead, stand right up. Give us a first name at least and say hi to Governor Sununu.
Hi, my name is Brittany. Governor, the interpretation of the Constitution has been a hot topic among the presidential candidates, and you've said the word many times yourself already. Can you shed some light on the role of the president and other federal governing bodies when it comes to interpreting the Constitution in the modern day?
I think the easiest answer I can give you is the Constitution means what it says. And you know, for people to say, well, we ought to be interpreting those words under new interpretations of what they might have meant, I think is a serious mistake.
It's not an evolving paradigm?
No, it's not an evolving paradigm. If you want to change it, you have a process for changing it. We should go ahead and, you know, if we really want to change it and put other things in it, use the process. They were smart enough to give us a process that can be initiated by the states or by the Congress. And we have at times made major changes. I think there's 27 amendments. So it can be done that way. But let me tell you, you've asked the question, let me tell you what I'm worried about in this election. And I will give you now a very partisan answer. I have really decided I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. Wasn't an easy decision, but it's a serious and a committed decision. And one of the things I'm worried about is the Supreme Court. And I'll tell you the three things that I'm most worried about relative to the Supreme Court that people don't talk about. Number one is the First Amendment and freedom of speech. Under the liberal trends of Mrs. Clinton and many of her supporters, we have created a climate in this country of political correctness that is killing freedom of speech. And I am petrified that a liberal-stacked Supreme Court will legitimize, if you will, the idea that we no longer can have debate and discourse on issues on campuses. That's insane. I taught at Tufts for 16 years. We argued like hell all the time, but we argued. And to now say that you can't do that, to me, is unbelievably crazy. The second thing is I'm scared to death about freedom of religion. And I look at what this administration did to the Sisters of the Poor, and I cringe to see how that can be extended by a progressive Supreme Court. And I'm scared about freedom of the press. I see what this administration did in freely giving up control of the internet to an entity in which censorship-driven bodies like Russia and China have a significant say. And I am scared to death of us beginning to make laws to permit, if you will, that kind of international perspective to begin to take control of what we can and can't print within the press of the United States. Those are serious issues, and the way that has gone down a slippery slope in the last 7 or 8 years scares me to death. And so you asked about the Constitution. Those are constitutional issues that I really hope that we understand that when the Constitution says freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech, that it really means that. Not, well, there's a nuanced word for freedom. That's insane.
Let me ask, this is a lot of students in here. Those of you who are students, how many of you are aware of what's going on with control of the internet? And just by applause, do you agree with Governor Sununu, and do you share the concerns that he has about us relinquishing the internet and control of the internet? Are there any of you in the audience by applause who disagrees with him and think we should give up the internet? I guess not. Did that answer your question? You asked a really good question. Do you want to? Is there an adequate answer there, or you wanted to be more specific about a specific issue?
I was basically just curious as to his interpretation, or rather his thoughts on the president, interpreting the Constitution maybe based on his own or her own particular
The
beliefs.
president's not supposed to interpret
If the president has a disagreement with the Constitution, he should take it to the Supreme Court. with what is being treated as what the Constitution says. He's got to take it, or she's got to take it to the Supreme Court and get it decided. And that's to have a president that is arrogant enough to think that they don't have to do that scares the hell out of me.
You know, as a lawyer, I learned in law school that the Congress passes laws, President enforces laws, and the Supreme Court interprets laws. Now, I know that those three verbs are very selective, but I think you would probably agree with that, Governor, from your point of view.
Thank God I'm not a lawyer.
Okay, well, that's true. We know. None of us can be perfect, Governor.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
No, I know. Only kidding. David is somewhere. Yes, I see the red sign up there. We have another question from the audience. Go right ahead.
Must be a freshman.
Well, Governor, it is a pleasure to meet you. My name is Patty, and I was privileged to graduate from a private women's college. When I paid back my student loans, they were 3%. I am very concerned about the students in this audience and the deficit and the Affordable Care Act and what this will cost them in the future.
Well, that's a great question. The other slice of what's going on today that also keeps me awake at night is what I refer to as our willingness to be pandered to. And we don't get angry when people find a way to just press our button by offering us something. And first of all, the issue of the cost of higher education is an unbelievable problem. But let me tell you what's at the heart of that. I chaired the Finance Committee at Tufts for 5 years. What's at the heart of it is that we have allowed, and have not complained as citizens, we have allowed, and I'm sorry, President Wiley, you may not be happy with my answer here, we have allowed higher education to increase tuitions at more than twice the rate of inflation of everything else. And when you do that, in the period of time that regular prices double, tuition has gone up by almost 5 times. So the problem, if you want to solve the basic problem, we've got to figure out how to deal with the unfettered permission to higher education to keep bumping tuitions up. That's the first thing. The second thing, you mentioned health care. I am scared to death that the pandering of both tuitions and health care is going to put us in the control of bureaucrats in Washington for the rest of my life. And when people say, again, ask me why I've decided to vote for Trump, I say I think that she is on a slippery slope to socialism, particularly with offering free education and free health care. And that's a slope that once you get on it, you will never get off of it. And when people say, well, how can you say that? And how can you use the word socialism? I say, Mrs. Clinton's 2 favorite surrogates are, number one, a self-avowed socialist by the name of Bernie Sanders, and a non-self-avowed socialist by the name of Elizabeth Warren. And if we don't understand that we get tempted when people pander to us, when people offer us bread and circuses, we are, as in the old Roman days when they offered bread and circuses, in the last throes of survival for this system that has been so great for so long.
You know, Governor, I got to make a confession. When my son was in grammar school, he ran for president.
In my ear?
Well, no, I can't do that. He ran for president of his class in grammar school, and I convinced him that he should give away Hershey Kisses in return for promises of votes. He won the election. Does that make me a socialist?
The fact
Pretty close.
the fact that you put it in the context of having to make a confession is self-condemning. I don't have to put it any further than that.
Well, I just feel that honesty is the best policy. We're going to take a quick break. We have more questions from our audience. We will get to some phone calls later. The point I was making, obviously, is my son with Hershey Kisses could win votes. Well, some politicians give away a lot more than Hershey Kisses. We'll be back on Nightside. 617-254-1030, 888-929-1030. If you want to join us on the phone, we got plenty of questions here at Endicott College. Welcome back, everyone. We're here at in Beverly, Massachusetts, at the Endicott College, a great school, great college. Before we get to a couple of more audience questions, we're going to very quickly ask a question. Governor, you mentioned how the 2/3 of the people dislike roughly both the Democrat and Republican nominee for president. It's been a nasty political year. Have you ever seen a year and you've been through some nasty fights yourself, Governor. Has it ever reached this level of nastiness before, in your opinion?
No, I think we have drifted over the last decade or so into a climate that is not healthy, and we ought to, as a society, try and figure out how to deal with this later. But I think part of the problem is that we used to have a press that was relatively consistent with itself and would be a check and balance. But they have now drifted to being so partisan towards the progressive side that it is a problem. I'll give you one good example. My son's running for governor in New Hampshire. He runs a ski area. One of the big issues against him that they keep spending millions of dollars in ads on is saying that because of his management last year, there were fewer skiers at our ski area than before. Now, think about it. Last year was the worst snow year in history, almost, right? In the past, the press would point out how stupid that charge is. But now you can't get anybody in the press to even criticize any ad that is so blatantly ridiculous like that. And I think we have a press that is letting this campaign and in some cases contributing to the nastiness that we see. And I think the press has to really take a good hard look at itself, and we as citizens have to start demanding a little bit better relationship in this process, or else we're going to end up where we're going to be electing candidates on God knows what issues.
So, Governor, essentially you're telling us that your son, Chris Sununu, running for governor of New Hampshire, does not control the weather over the state of New Hampshire.
Not until he's elected.
Okay, fair enough. Good enough. Let's go to, yes, we have Beth has a questioner. Go right ahead, sir. You got the red hat on. How are you doing? What's your name?
Good. My name's Patrick. I'm from Salem, New Hampshire. Thank you for being with us tonight,
It's a pleasure. Thank
Governor. I am a proud Trump supporter, and something that
I saw, is that the red hat? I couldn't,
Yes.
yeah, okay,
yes,
I see that. Yeah, okay.
Signed by Mr. Trump himself.
You got to get Governor Sununu to sign it, really, if you want to be valuable.
So my question has to do with immigration, specifically in regards to why so many people, particularly my liberal cohorts, they usually say to me, "You're such a bigot for saying we need to crack down on immigration and the vetting process." And we have issues such as Kate Steinle's death, Orlando shooting, San Bernardino. All of those are very valid events that should be cracked down upon for immigration. Why are so many Americans so dead against cracking down on this immigration? And does it have anything to do with political correctness?
I think you're talking about illegal immigration, correct?
Correct.
Fair enough.
Yeah, look, it's one of the difficult issues, and the reason it's such a difficult issue is that immigration was so much a part of the tradition in this country. Legal immigration was, and there is a recognition that when it's done properly, it adds to what a nation can do. It adds to the brain talent that are here. It adds to the workforce. It adds to the diversity. All the things that you want to put on the positive side of the ledger. What has happened is that, in my opinion, we have had an executive branch that has failed to implement the laws for what I believe are political reasons. And as a result of that, it has created an internal tension in this country that I find destructive. And that destructive tension, in my opinion, has contributed to the intensity of some of the nastiness in this campaign. And we talked a little bit before about what the chief executive's responsibilities are in terms of what they should do. There are also responsibilities that limit what they shouldn't do. And it was, in my opinion, a dramatic failure on the part of the President of the United States not to enforce the laws of the United States. And he has created a division in this country that is so destructive that I'm absolutely convinced that once he leaves office, the inflated perception that he has created for himself will wither completely.
One more question, at least one more question. We'll get two in. I'm going to try here. Dave, we have a question from this young lady.
Hi, my name's Eleanor Snyder. Thank you for being here.
Are you a student here?
Yes, I am.
What year?
I'm a junior.
All right. What's your major?
Political science.
All right. You got a good one here. Go right ahead.
Well, I
I'm
don't
in
know.
trouble, huh?
No, I think you're all right. You've mentioned the Constitution, you've mentioned the Supreme Court, and you mentioned executive actions and how it's important that we be critical of even Obama's executive actions because at some point someone else might be in charge that we don't like. So my question is about the Supreme Court and the fact that the Senate has failed to confirm Merrick Garland for over half a year now, or even have a hearing about this. I'd like to know your thoughts on that issue, considering the Constitution provides that as the Senate's job.
More than a half a year. Good question.
What that aspect in the Constitution is, not that the Congress must approve or must vote, that nobody can go there unless they choose to do that. And so I have no problem with them saying this is the last year, we're in the middle of an election, and this ought to be allowed to be an appointment for the next President of the United States. They have certain rights. It creates conflict. It creates tension between the branches, but it is there for a reason. And for people to want it to just be pushed aside because it might be convenient for their perspective, I think is a serious mistake. Because there will be a day on the other side, and you will not want to have given up the real rights that are given to the legislative body under the Constitution.
And ironically, depending upon the results on November 8th, the Republicans might get a much more liberal nominee from a President
And so
Clinton.
that's a decision that legislative body has to make.
All right, we have another question up in the corner here. Go right ahead, sir. Oh, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Tacey.
Hi, Casey.
The media severely impacted the presidential campaign, as we talked about a little earlier. Donald Trump has had about 81 minutes or so on ABC of news coverage, which is unprecedented. Do you think if they had covered him or Hillary different, like Bernie Sanders, who's had about 30 seconds of news coverage, the outcome of their candidacy would be different?
And we're going to get into that in the next hour. We have some journalists here, so I hope you stick around for the next hour as well. Governor, we have less than a minute and a half on
I
this.
think Bernie Sanders got screwed, and I think the 81 minutes that you talked about for Donald Trump, 79, they've been attacking him. So I don't think he's done that well either.
Okay, we'll try one more quick one here if we can. Get less than a minute. Go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, my name is James, and we're talking about our lack of choice with candidates in this election as well as others. And my question is, why isn't there more or any formal recruitment effort made by either party to draw in new candidates for office? In my district alone, I have all of my candidates, except for the president, running unopposed.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier, I actually
30 seconds, Governor.
I went back in 2009, 2010 to help rebuild a Republican Party in the state. The parties have to commit themselves to rebuilding themselves, both sides, because the strength of this country is a strong two-party system, and both parties ought to make sure that all election seats are filled with contested candidates so that we, the voters, have an opportunity to choose. Well,
But unfortunately, we have to leave it at that point because we're flat out of time.
They're
I think
wrong.
You got to get involved.
You're right.
You got to
They're
get involved.
wrong.
You got to get involved too. Governor Sununu, thank you very much. Let's have a great round of applause for Governor John Sununu. If you missed civics in high school and civics as a freshman here at Endicott College, and I hope you did at Endicott College, you just got a civics lesson, ladies and gentlemen, thanks to John Sununu. Governor, thank you very much. Sure, absolutely. Governor's going to talk to you when we go off, okay? So to the radio audience, we're going to break for the news. We come back, we're going to have three distinguished journalists, but for you in the studio audience, thank you for your attention. Let's give the governor a nice round of applause. We'll be back right after the 9 o'clock news.
Welcome to Staples.
Staples guy, have to move fast in business. Gotta go.
I really want to thank you for coming this evening, and I really do commend to you to understand how this system was put together. I'll make one more point on compromise. When those folks went to Philadelphia to fix the Articles of Confederation, they realized they were going to have to write something new. But every one of them that went down there went down with instructions from their colonies. The big colonies said, don't give too much power to the small colonies. The importing colonies said, don't give too much power to the exporting. The North versus the South, slave versus non-slave. And somehow they miraculously found a way to create a compromise in about 100 days that ended up being the Constitution. And there's a great book by a lady called Catherine Drinker Bowen called The Miracle in Philadelphia, and in my opinion, it truly was a miracle. To me, it's the best education on what the system should be all about. Thanks again for coming this evening.
Nightside Talk the Vote 2016, broadcasting live from Endicott College in Beverly.
We are back live at Endicott College in Beverly. I'll tell you, we got a great audience. Thank you all very much. For those of you who are just tuning in, this, of course, is Nightside, a special on-the-road edition of Nightside Talk the Vote from Endicott College. We're about 30 miles or so north of Boston, right in the Atlantic Ocean for you geography majors, and one of the most beautiful, physically beautiful college campuses, not only in New England, but as far as I'm concerned, anywhere in America, anywhere in the world for that matter. Great student body. President Richard Wiley has done a fabulous job. He's been here for 30 years at this school. There's no college president that I know that cares more about his students and his faculty and his administrators. And when you walk around this campus, you realize that this has just morphed from what once was a wonderful two-year college into a four-year institution with 2,800 undergraduates. 93% of them live here on campus, and 2,600 graduate students. This is it's a place to behold. So we thank Dick Wiley for once again inviting us here to Endicott College. We want to thank John Sununu. You all know that Governor Sununu is a man of intelligence, of wonderful vocabulary, and perhaps more importantly, strong words. We have three people here also who have wonderful vocabulary, and they use words every day of the week. They are journalists. All of them, each of them are friends of mine. They have a variety of different viewpoints, and we're going to just do a quick introduction so for those of you who might not know these folks, all of whom are well-known and veteran observers of politics and life in general. Joan Vanocchi of the Boston Globe. Joan is a columnist. We broke in as reporters many, many years ago at places like the State House and City Hall. I'm now a broken-down talk show host. She's a columnist for a major Boston newspaper. Joan, tell us, the folks in the audience, how did you get to this position of prominence?
That's a really good question, Dan. I'm not sure what the answer is.
Right up on that microphone. Right up close.
I just love writing about politics, and I've had the opportunity to do that for many years, and it's a lot of fun, as you know. Lots going on in Massachusetts and lots going on in the presidential right now.
And next to Joan, on her right, figuratively and also politically, is a great friend of many years, Jeff Jacoby. He is, I think we could describe him as a conservative/libertarian. He'll describe himself. He writes a column for the Boston Globe. I think one of the most insightful members of the editorial team on the Boston Globe. I don't know how much input he has into the editorials himself, but I really enjoy his columns. Jeff, how did you end up at the Boston Globe? Come on.
You know, when I was a kid, I said I wanted to be a judge when I grew up. I announced that when I was 6 years old, which came as a surprise to everybody who knew me because there were no judges or lawyers or even college graduates in my family. Well, it didn't quite work out that way, although I did go to law school and did get the law degree and even joined the law firm at one point. But somehow I still ended up rendering opinions. It's just that they don't have the force of law. But they should.
Well, yes, in many cases they should. And at the same time, I suspect that, well, I have a friend who's a faculty member on a college in Georgia, and he tells me that at faculty meetings he loses every vote, I think 31-1. What's the ratio at the Globe when the editorial people sit around the table? I know you're going to be the one. How many people do you hold out against, generally?
Occasionally, we're on the same side.
All right. How about that? Some bipartisanship at the Globe.
Those powers of persuasion, you never know what they
Only kidding. I'm teasing you. You know that. To Jeff's right, is the editor of a great newspaper, the Lowell Sun. Now, the Globe, of course, is a great newspaper. There's no doubt about that. But if you don't read the Lowell Sun, you miss out. It is a very important part of Massachusetts, the entire Merrimack Valley. This is the top guy at the Lowell Sun. Those of you who are looking to work in newspapers, he's the guy you should talk to, Jim Campanini. Jim, why didn't you enter an honest profession? How come you entered journalism?
Well, I thought you were going to ask me how I got to where I am, and I was going to say I outlived everybody who was ahead of me. So, but no, it's I think early in my college days, I was a paper boy, and I was just interested in being informed about everything. I read everything. I engaged with people. I always loved to go different places and go to events. And I think I embraced communities that I've worked with 6 different newspapers, and I just love the people in the industry and the people that we've met. So all these people here, I think we've all persevered in some way with the challenges that the industry has gone through in recent years. But I think we do it because we're well-intentioned, and we want to bring truth. I think we want to bring truth to everything that we do and see. And we do our best, and we make mistakes, yes, but I think that drives all of us, the truth.
And everybody should read newspapers.
Everybody should read newspapers, there's no doubt about that. What percent of the audience continue to read newspapers? A round of applause. How many of you will read a newspaper during the day? That's a good sign. That's a very good sign. Okay, we only have about a minute or so left in this segment, then we got to go to break. So just to get it started, they don't know the questions I'm going to ask them. So we're going to get audience questions too. Joan, I'm going to start with you. I want to know what's the headline in the Globe, and of course I'm going to know the headline from Jeff and also from Jim. What is the headline in the Globe on Wednesday morning, November 9th, and also the sub-headline?
Why do we get the hard questions first? Trump loses.
What's the sub-headline? What's the sub? There's got to be a sub-headline.
Well, first woman elected president.
Okay, fair enough. That's. I guess.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
First nasty woman elected president.
Okay. Jeff, what's the headline and the sub-headline?
I don't know that I'm in the prediction business, but
you can tell us about a 4-alarm fire in Chelsea if you want.
well, maybe the headline ought to be "Republican Party rest in peace."
And the sub?
Sweet meteor of death does not strike Earth. Politics go on.
Okay. Jim Campanini, Lowell Sun page headline and the sub-headline.
Trump takes over Mexico.
Trump deported to Mexico.
But I think, no, I think it'd be a historic day either way. And if Hillary should win, we should recognize that the first woman in America's history is a president. If Trump should win, I hope he will say that the election wasn't rigged.
All right, fair enough. Okay, we're going to take a break. Audience questions coming up. We may get to some phone calls later, so don't call in. You can call in, we'll let you know, but we have a bunch of folks here going to ask audience questions. This is Nightside, Talk the Vote, Endicott College, great studio audience. We'll be back with 3 really good journalists right after these messages. We're at Endicott College, Beverly, Massachusetts. I'll tell you, if you're a high school junior or senior, this is one college you should look at. On November 8th, one of these 2 people will be elected president. I don't know if that's good news, bad news, or whatever. But my question to my 3 journalists, Joan Vanocchi, Jeff Jacoby, Jim Campanini, twofold. How did we get here? And do you think Donald Trump actually wants to win the presidency? Any of you could start first. Joan, to start first because you've started first twice.
How did we get here? I mean, I think,
And the reason I say this,
Right.
we have this outsider, the ultimate outsider from the Republican Party, and the ultimate insider from the Democratic Party,
and we also had an outsider on the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders.
who was, in the words of John Sununu, screwed.
Right. Well, what happened was a two-person race, and between him and Hillary Clinton, I don't think he was screwed. I think there were more votes for Hillary Clinton.
Tell that to Bernie Sanders.
The opposite with Trump, the outsider with this huge field of Republicans. It was easier for him to get the 24% or the 30% that made him a winner time after time in the primaries. Did the media play a role in his rise? Absolutely yes. He's an entertainer. He was fun and interesting to watch. No one really thought he could win, and before you knew it, this wave built, and he's the nominee.
Okay, so no one thought he could win. Do you think he really wants to win?
I think he's a guy that doesn't like to lose, so yeah, I think he wants to win.
Okay. Jeff, how did we get here? What's your reaction?
I'll go back to a different starting point. Rather than analyze the dynamics of the primary field, I think this election campaign, this presidential season, has been a culmination of trends that have been building over the past 15, 20 years in American culture, going back maybe to the first Clinton administration, the Bill Clinton administration. Society and American politics have gotten more and more polarized, more and more separated, more and more about what you're against as opposed to what you're for. I don't ever remember living through, experiencing, watching a presidential campaign in which both major party candidates were so unpopular with so much of the American public, and in which the great majority of voters, when they're asked in polls, will say that their vote is really on voting against the other guy as opposed to voting for the candidate that they're supporting.
Or the other gal.
Or the other gal.
Sure. Don't want to be sexist.
This is a level of negativity and polarization and hostility that I think is very, very unhealthy. And it's been fed by a whole lot of trends that have taken place in American culture. The internet has driven, I think, an enormous amount of this. We weren't really joking when we said everybody should read newspapers. One of the things you get when you read a newspaper, a daily metropolitan newspaper, is a sense of the waterfront. You get opinions and ideas and news stories that are organized, that are edited, that are curated by someone who's trying to put together a whole picture, a whole package. On the internet, it's become so easy to surround yourself with a bubble in which all you listen to are opinions that you already agree with.
It's an echo chamber.
And which the only voices you hear are those that are saying what you already think. And that just exacerbates and intensifies the sense of grievance that so many people have developed, both on the right and on the left.
I know you guys are newspaper guys, but do you think you get that sense of balance journalistically from, let's say, the New York Times? I get the Times and the number of articles which are intentionally anti-Trump. Now, he gives them a lot of ammunition, but there was one today, I think, where there was a child who's Muslim who had a nightmare about Donald Trump. And that is a story in the New York Times today. As maybe that is, I had a lot of nightmares as a kid. I never made the New York Times.
Okay, listen. Anyway, I don't know about my colleagues here, I would certainly not disagree that the New York Times is a very left-of-center newspaper. By and large, journalism is a left-of-center profession. It tends to attract people who are more likely to be liberal. I'm something of an exception in that field, to that rule. But even in the New York Times, you can be an arch-conservative, you can be a total libertarian, and still read the New York Times and find information that you didn't know about, be exposed to stories that you wouldn't have thought about otherwise. And the same is true if you're a liberal. By contrast, if you get all of your information by reading, Breitbart, or all of your information from reading Daily Kos, you're just going to get one particular, very skewed view of the world. Give me a New York Times any day, as imbalanced as its political opinions may sometimes be, rather than have people relying simply on their own favorite blogs or their own particular websites where all they ever hear just reinforces what they already think they know. There's an enormous amount of misinformation and bad attitude out there, and the digital revolution is just making it worse.
Could I just go back to...
why don't you go back, but I do want to get to Jim in a second.
Yeah. When the original question, how did we get here?
the original question, but that was good. I like that.
I think it's come down to a crisis.
And does Trump really want to win?
There's a crisis of leadership in America right now. I think most Americans, a large majority, are losing confidence and faith in the institutions, especially on the national level. So you see the Democrats, they anoint a candidate, because if they looked at down the line in the Democratic Party, there are a lot more people who are more qualified than Hillary Clinton to run for president, based on her track record, okay? On the other side, the Republicans tried to be so democratic, they let everyone in, and you're right, the orange showed up against the rest of all the because people, once again, questioning the status quo, questioning government, they want a change. America is going through a lot of transformational changes. A lot of things are being done. The challenges, like you talk about immigration, healthcare, jobs, the economy. And these people aren't solving the problems, Republicans and Democrats. So unless there's a fundamental change in what happens after November 8th, okay, we're going to be in the same boat. The next 4 years aren't going to solve themselves. And I think that's why people right now are going through this process of great turmoil, and a lot of them are disheartened in these choices, but they're going to vote because America will survive. But how will it survive, and under what conditions will it change?
Jim Campanini quoting Gloria Gaynor. I like that. And does Trump want to win?
I think he wants to win. Of course he wants to win. He's got the biggest ego in, this side of the Atlantic Ocean. I think he does want to win.
Trump wants to win, but he has no interest in governing.
I just wanted to add something to Jeff's sweep of history. He went back to the Bill Clinton era. I would go back to 2008 and Obama, when some of the people in this audience were middle school, 13 years old. If you remember anything about it, it was about change we can believe in and hope. Obama got up and said, there is no red America, there's no blue America, there's purple America. And I think for a very brief moment in time, at least for the time it took to cast the votes for him in 2008, the country really believed that. And over the last 8 years, that's been proven wrong. I mean, in some ways, that's the biggest disappointment to me of the Obama era, that that hope that people had that we all could be on the same page and put aside partisan differences turned out to be a false hope. And in some ways, I see this election, yes, he was reelected in 2012 for a lot of reasons, including kind of a stiff Republican candidate named Mitt Romney, but I see this election as kind of a reaction to a disbelief that there can be a nonpartisan America.
I don't think that people want nonpartisan so much as they want
be on the same page.
A sense that there can be bipartisan cooperation on a lot. And that feeling wasn't gone yet in 2008. The Economist magazine, which is thought of as a British magazine.
He wrote it into the White House.
Most of its subscribers are Americans. In 2008, The Economist put on its cover, as November of 2008 approached, a picture of Barack Obama and John McCain, the two major party nominees that year, and the big headline on the cover was "America at its best."
Right, and it was.
There was a feeling that here you had two people, however much you might disagree with one or the other, and believe me, I had no use for Barack Obama's politics. I still don't. I think he's been a terrible president. But nevertheless, even still, I could see in Obama something that spoke really well of America and the history that America was able to surmount in putting him in the White House.
Right.
But both sides, both left and right, Republican and Democrat, Obama's followers and McCain's followers, once the election was over, didn't really build on that sense of possibility. Instead, there was a lot of tearing down the case on both sides.
Let's fast forward to Obama being sworn into office and the Republicans in Congress dedicating themselves to make sure he wasn't reelected. I mean, right away, they were not on the same page. They weren't trying to solve the fiscal crisis.
But every party does that.
Not to that extent, Jeff. That was extreme. I believe it was extreme.
Well, I mean, I think you're referring to Mitch McConnell, who is now the Republican leader in the Senate, the Senate Majority Leader. In 2010, after the midterm election, following Obama's election, there was a midterm election in which
the Tea Party,
in which Republicans won the huge majority. Obama's term was that I think he said he got thumped or he got shellacked or something like that. It was in the wake of that election when there was suddenly this big new majority in Congress that McConnell made that
No, he made it
infamous
immediately
comment.
after his election.
It was in
Well,
2010, it was 2 years later,
well.
that McConnell said, our number one priority now is making sure that he'll be a one-term president, looking forward to the next 2 years. But I would say that every party does that. When George W. Bush was elected, Democrats certainly intended to do whatever they could to make sure that a Democrat would win the office.
Well, I talk
Well,
about
you
the
can
media.
see how we got here, because we're arguing.
No, that's fine. That's good. But I also want to just raise something, and I thought about this the other day, and if you disagree in the audience, please feel free. We're going to get the questions after this break, I promise. I know that Donald Trump has provided an incredible amount of ammunition to the media that doesn't like him. I mean, to me, it's astonishing, the things that he's said even beyond 2005. Never mind 2005. That was incredible. But all the stuff that he said, whether it was to Megyn Kelly, about John McCain, and we all said, oh, that's it, he's done, etc. So the media, I think, has every reason to have gone after Donald Trump, including the New York Times. But I think about 2012, and I think about the way in which the media went after Mitt Romney, who was not the most exciting candidate in the world. But my recollection of Mitt Romney, other than the 47% comment and women in file folders, meaning women's resumes in file folders, there was a huge story which the media jumped all over. You may remember this. Mitt Romney, when he was 15 at a private boarding school, gave noogies to another kid. And it became a major news story. The point is that I think no matter who the Republicans nominated, including Mother Teresa, the New York Times would have savaged the Republican candidate.
You know, a colleague of ours, a colleague of Jones and mine, Yvonne Abraham, who's a columnist on the front of the Metro paper.
Oh yeah, I know Yvonne.
So Yvonne wrote a column some weeks ago, the headline of which was something like, "I'm so sorry, Mitt Romney." And for several days, that was the #1 read piece on the Boston Globe website.
But she really didn't mean it.
I don't know. You go back, you go and you read that column, and she says that she acknowledges that she, like a lot of people who share her politics, was very, very hard on Romney, and now she realizes that by comparison with what the Republicans have nominated this year, the attack on Romney was way overboard, and nothing, and a treatment that somebody is gentle.
But it's wouldn't acknowledge that now. She should have acknowledged it then. By the way, Yvonne Abraham, one of my least favorite columnists of the Boston Globe, I would add, a native of Australia, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
A very nice person.
A lovely person. Bring her on the show some night, by the way. Go ahead, Jim.
Even these stories, if you consider them frivolous or serious, I would rather have the opportunity of the press to write all these stories. The problem lies with the individuals, okay, who don't vet these stories, okay, aren't well informed, don't read the newspaper, get TV impressions, but then pass on reading the longest stories in print. The New York Times, the Boston Globe, or the Lowell Sun, no matter what perspective they come from. See, it used to be a time where Americans could discriminate, okay, in looking at their research.
How about use the word distinguish as opposed
to a conclusion, a fair conclusion. Okay, right now, they're more interested, I think, in looking at TV, getting these basic impressions, and not doing their homework that a lot of the hardworking press, I think, does deliver. So I'd rather read all those stuff than be in a country where you can't read that stuff.
I just wish we'd be a little more balanced, particularly.
I don't think the media are responsible for the implosion of Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is responsible for the implosion. Okay.
I said
that. He's in your face. The debates, I think, were as deciding and defining as anything we could see. That has mattered more than whatever is on the front page of the New York Times, which, by the way, I agree, has been extremely biased.
It's not as if Hillary Clinton is...
Where would Hillary Clinton be if she was running against another candidate besides Donald Trump, who has...
She'd be a decided underdog.
I have written that...
All the stuff that's come out.
I think I would disagree with all three of you. I think the New York Times would have done everything. If it was Mitt Romney against Hillary Clinton, they'd still be doing stories about Mitt Romney giving noogies to a kid at 15.
The New York Times doesn't elect a presidential candidate. People make... people's make up their minds based on much more than what a segment of the population is seeing on page 1 of the New York Times.
But that's the people, the part of the population that reached page 1 of the New York Times dutifully are the producers of the evening newscasts, national evening newscasts who are based in New York City.
And yet, Dan, you know, you and I go back a long ways, and so let's agree the major newspapers like the New York Times can be very biased, very left-leaning, very Democratic supporting. They weren't able
on the news page.
They weren't able to keep Ronald Reagan from being elected and reelected, and George Bush Sr. from being elected. They weren't able to keep George W. Bush from being elected and reelected. They weren't able to keep the Republicans from taking control of the House of Representatives. There's a certain limitation. There's a major limitation to the power of the press. We're not omnipotent as much as sitting in the editorial meeting we might sometimes think we are. We're not omnipotent.
All right. On that point, we can agree. They're not omnipotent, but they're going to be here. We're going to get the questions
Now, the radio
from the
talk
audience.
hosts, on the other hand, those guys have all the power.
We are back at Beverly, Massachusetts, at Endicott College, and we're going to go right to the studio audience, and I'm going to slide over here and try to stay out of the way. David has a gentleman with a question. Feel free to give us a name, and if you're an associate of the school, give the school a plug and ask whatever you want.
Yes, I'm Scott from Quincy. If Hillary Clinton is elected, will you think she'll be considered Dick Nixon the sequel?
I missed that. Did you guys get that?
Should be what, the sequel? Dick Nixon.
If Hillary Clinton is elected, will she be considered Richard Nixon the sequel?
Well, maybe by Republicans, but I actually think Hillary
Well,
Clinton,
she's had a good start.
I think she's a lot more Nixonian than Richard Nixon ever was. I think she's gotten away with a lot more than Richard Nixon ever could have gotten away with. But listen, she's like Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton is, I think today or yesterday, is her 60th birthday. When you've lived on this earth for 7 decades, you don't change your personality, you don't change your fundamental nature. She's untrusting, she's secretive. She always parses things very carefully. She seems to have a deep hunger to acquire power and apparently to acquire money and wealth as well. I don't think any of that's going to change. She also seems to have a real vindictive streak when it comes to dealing with people that she thinks are in her way. Joan may not agree with me in this harsh assessment, but I think Hillary Clinton is a disaster. I think Donald Trump was a disaster as well. I don't plan to vote for either one of them. I'm voting for a third-party candidate. But I think if she becomes president...
Are you voting for Aleppo?
I'm voting libertarian. I'm voting libertarian.
You're voting for Aleppo too?
No.
No, okay. All right. I don't mean to invade their privacy, but I know Jeff well enough. I could kid with him.
No. Listen, I mean, anybody can have well, I wrote a whole column making the point that as far as I'm concerned here, and this goes to your question really, that for me what matters most this year are not questions of policy. It's not the Supreme Court. It's not the economy. It's not who's going to do what on welfare reform. It's not who's got what platform in education. To me, considering the nature of the two major party candidates, what matters more than anything else this year is character. I think there needs to be a certain basic level of decency and character and good values that Americans should insist on in their chief executive. In November of 1800, John and Abigail Adams became the first people to move into the White House. And Adams moved in a few days before Abigail came up from Braintree. And he wrote her a letter on his first night in the White House. And there was, toward the end of that letter, he ended with a little prayer. In fact, not like a little prayer. He ended with a prayer in which he said, may only honest, wise people ever live under this roof. Many years later, FDR had those words engraved on the mantelpiece in the main White House dining room. The idea that there should be people with a certain level of decency and good character, I think, never used to be questioned before. Now you look at Hillary Clinton and you look at Donald Trump, and I think we're looking at two major party candidates who are so devoid of character. I find them both a basket of deplorables of their own. So I think either one of them, if elected, will continue with all the bad qualities that we've seen, which is why I'm not going to vote for either one of them.
So integrity is an important characteristic.
It ought to be.
For me, it's total.
For
me, it's total. That's why I won't vote for Hillary Clinton. Go ahead, Jim.
I voted Monday, the first day that it was open to anyone in Lowell, and I did it because I had been so conflicted I kept changing my mind. And I'm not going to tell you who I voted for, but I was not proud of my vote, but I do know that one way or the other after November, I'm proud of America. I know America will survive, and American people are resilient. But it's the first time in the voting booth that I ever said a prayer for America. And I think it's a serious choice that we all have to make this time. And I think I urge you all to go out to vote and to follow your conscience.
I might also mention he's wearing a John Adams tie that missed it. Joan?
Well, without saying exactly who I'm going to vote for, it's probably not all that hard to guess, but I'd say that
Read her columns.
no, a lot of imperfect men have lived under the roof in the White House. So if an imperfect woman does, I'm willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. I think Hillary Clinton has a lot of, she has baggage, she's made mistakes, but she's never been president. And if she is, I look forward to seeing her prove Jeff wrong.
Me too. If she becomes president, I hope she'll prove me wrong.
Joan, I don't want to put you on the
expect-
spot, but on the scale of 1 to 10 on integrity, what would you give your candidate? Or Hillary Clinton, I should say.
Oh, I don't think you could rate it like that. I really don't.
You what?
I mean, what's integrity? I mean,
Honesty.
all right. JFK turned out to be a liar and a cheat in a certain way. Some people hated FDR. I mean, the people that we now look to as heroes and elevate to this higher level.
You're not comparing Hillary Clinton to JFK and FDR, I assume.
I don't know. They probably all lied a bit.
I don't think.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
She hasn't. You know,
Yeah.
they served their time in the White House and they are judged on their time in the White House. She hasn't gotten there yet. If she does, that's when I'll judge her.
Okay, we'll do this again in a couple of years. So go ahead, Jeff.
I don't think imperfect is the standard that we're
I don't
trying to
see her as a
insist that
liar, a
people
cheat,
are.
and a corrupt person.
Okay, so if you genuinely don't, then
I don't.
then I have no objection. I look at what I know of her career and what I see of the way she acted when she was First Lady and how she acted as she's been a candidate for president. And I just don't think it's not, for me, it's not a question of imperfect. Everyone who has lived in the White House, including all the First Ladies, have been imperfect in some way. All human beings are imperfect. But I think that with Trump and with Hillary Clinton, we see a void of good character. At least that's my
Philosophically, I'm a conservative. I could have voted for Bernie Sanders before I voted for
I
Hillary
voted for
Clinton.
Bernie in the primary.
Because he actually has a
Massachusetts-
core belief, a set of
Yeah,
beliefs.
In the primary in Massachusetts, even though I'm pretty staunch conservative libertarian, I took a Democratic ballot, and I voted for Bernie Sanders. And I explained at the time, to people that I didn't see that I was going to be able to have any impact on the Republican side because it was clear that Trump was going to run away with the Massachusetts Republican primary vote. On the Democratic side, it was a lot closer. And I figured even though I don't think much of Bernie Sanders' political philosophy and values, at least he's got values. And I don't really know that Hillary Clinton has. I was willing to support in a Democratic primary even somebody who calls himself a socialist because I think at least he's got the character, and when he speaks, I think he means what he says.
We'll continue our conversation. We got more questions right here from Endicott College in Beverly, Massachusetts. Feel free to stay with us. We'll be here until 10. Tim Cahill will take over in the studio from 10 to 12. I'll thank Tim in advance, and I'll thank all of you. It's been a great audience. One more segment coming right up here from Endicott College. Stay with us. And we're back live at Endicott College in Beverly, Massachusetts. Talk the Vote, night side on the road. Beth, an audience question. Are you a student, sir?
Yes, I'm a freshman here. My name is Nicholas, and my question is, why did it take up to 3 debates for Hillary Clinton to actually be faced with tough questions like pay-to-play allegations, her emails, and other scandals as that, where in the first 2 debates, how they were completely ignored by anchors that could be, viewed as tend to be more liberal political views?
Joan, you want to take that first?
Sure, I'll take that
Okay.
first. Listen, I think those are fair questions that she should answer, and I would put it in Donald Trump's lap. I don't think he was a good debater. He made so much of the debates about himself. He didn't press the points. He didn't know how to ask questions to her. Okay, blame the moderators if that's what you want to do, but if you're the candidate running against her, it's his job, I think, to make sure that she confronts the question and answers it, and he just was really bad at that.
I think the second and third debate moderators were better than the first debate moderators. There were 4 tough questions to Trump. debate, one that was arguably tough to Hillary. Jeff, Jim, quick comment?
I agree with Joe, and I think first and foremost, it's the responsibility of each candidate to make sure that you get your attack points and the criticisms aimed at your opponent. But I also think that a lot of it is the moderator, and of all the moderators in this year's batch, I would say that Chris Wallace, who moderated the third debate, did the best job, and I think that's become the consensus, that he had tough questions for both candidates, and he didn't let either one get away with just simply squirming away and ducking it. He pressed them both hard, and I was glad that he did it.
Jim, your thoughts?
Well, it's unfortunate that the candidates have come down to sloganeering, and that's what they're trying to do in these little 3 or 4 words that are going to be stick in your brain, and that's all you're going to take away from that. And they keep repeating it because their handlers say, just keep repeating it, talk over each other and do it. And it's unfortunate that those debates should have moderators from newspapers like my own, a community newspaper, instead of someone who thinks he's or she is a celebrity TV person who has to satisfy a liberal ownership, a corporate ownership. Okay, I think the presidential committee that puts debates, they should put it in the hands of newspapers like maybe the Globe, maybe the Herald, maybe the Lowell Sun, and other papers around the country who ask questions for a living day in and day out and don't take crap.
I'll tell you, I'm not sure why there have to be moderators. There were no moderators when Abraham Lincoln and Douglas debated in 1858. I'm also not sure.
And Douglas supposedly was drunk.
There was a series of 7 debates that Lincoln and Douglas did. The debates lasted, I think they were 2 hours long, and instead of 2-minute answers, the debates agreed on what they were going to be debating about. The first one would speak for something like 60 minutes, and then the second one would respond for half an hour. I mean, long answers, long discussions of very serious and weighty topics.
There go the ratings.
They debated, on the contrary, by the standards of the 1850s,
What were the TV ratings of those debates?
They drew massive crowds out in the Midwest.
But I would
Tens of
say-
thousands of people came to hear them. There were no moderators. There were no 2-minute warning signs. I don't know why.
Joan in here. Go ahead, Joan.
I would just say that in these debates, I felt like the moderators were themselves less in them, and that Trump and Clinton went after each other. And I mean, it was kind of one-on-one for long periods of time. However, Trump decided to make the topics not important topics. I mean, he decided to make the topics Bill Clinton's women, as opposed to email or some of the other things. He just didn't.
Let me
have
try to get
press-
one more quick question in here from right down front. David?
Hi, my name is Isis Patterson. I'm currently a public policy major here at Endicott College. I'm in my sophomore year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. It's really a pleasure. I would like to go back to what Jeff said about character in this debate, in this race to the White House, how it being less about policy and more about character. And to me, what governs character is ideology. And ultimately, that's what we're voting for in this debate. That's what we're voting for in the White House. And with that, we have to look at the identity politics of the voters who are voting for which ideology to choose. Now, for Hillary Clinton, you have these young liberals who believe in change, who through technological innovations are being exposed to such realities of different types of people.
Because
in
we're
this
running
world.
out of time, give me to that question. I know there's a question coming.
So basically, what I'm saying is, can you speak to the identity politics of the voters and less about the policies and the individual that is actually running for the debate? Speak to the
That's
voters.
a broad question
It's
and
a
quick
huge,
answer.
It's a huge question. I would only say I think identity politics in this country has gotten so much worse in recent years. And there's this constant pressure being put on people to see themselves, first and foremost, not as Americans, not as voters, not as citizens, but as members of this particular identity, this particular minority group, this particular checkoff box. I don't think that it's healthy, and I think that it only fuels and foments this notion that we're supposed to look at everything through the eyes of the subgroup that we belong to. Maybe people have always been like that, but I think it's a lot worse now.
Joan or Jim, can you be real quick because we're running out of time? If you'd like to add
I'm not
anything.
sure if this speaks directly to the question, but I think, it does matter who's on the Supreme Court. It does matter what somebody says about immigration. It does matter if a candidate says they're going to ban Muslims. I don't know if that's identity politics or not, but that's a reason to vote for or against someone.
Jim, quick response.
I just say that, diversity of ideas matters, and I think the great part about America is we can study issues. We can be on other sides, but we can disagree civilly with each other and still come to, compromise. There's an art to it. And I think identity politics just leads to divisions and fractions, and it just pulls us apart.
Jim Campanini, thank you very much. Jeff Jacoby, Joan Vanaki, you guys are great. Thank you very much. Let's do it again, 4 years, same time, same place. So
Thank you,
I
Jim.
want to thank a lot of people, if you don't mind. I'd like to thank the president of Endicott College, Richard Wiley. Thanks so much, Richard, for having us here. The camera crew, Ellie Pye, who runs the Digital Media Center here at Endicott, along with the assistance from Endicott Communications students. For the set backdrop provided by Productions, Kenny Lewis and Napoleon, you guys are great. I also want to thank some of the folks here from WBZ, Amy Patton, Mark Manueli, and Peter Clark, Jay Brosselli, Nicole Romanek, Chris Siderick, my executive producer, who also has a show called Upfront on Sunday nights, Bill Flaherty, and our news and programming director, Peter Casey. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the hour. Tim Kail is on the other side. He will be talking next 2 hours about early voting. And I most especially want to thank all of you who stayed here at Endicott College. We love this school. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great night.